Good morning. Today is the 29th day of Tammuz, the last day of Tammuz. Tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh Av, the 18th of July. And we're up to the third reading of Parashat Devarim. And there's two things I'd like to focus on today. These readings are short and they're very rich because in a few sentences Moses is going over much of the history that they went through. One of the verses that sticks out. So just to recap, in this reading, he retells us the story of the spies. The story of the spies is actually told in three places in the Bible. The first place is obviously in Parashat Shlach. The second place is here, and the third place is in Psalms. I believe it's in chapter 108. Or 107, something like that. There, it's actually even different in certain respects. What is special about this time is that here Moses reveals that it was the people's idea to send the spies, not his. And Rashi has to, the classic commentary, Rashi has to sort of make sense of how could it be that here it's the people's idea, and when we originally read the story in Shlach and in Numbers, it seemed that it was Moses' idea, that he was the one who brought it before God, and he said, if you want to, you can send them. In any case, we won't get into that now because that's a very big topic of what exactly was Moses trying to do. Rashi gives his answer here. The Hasidic answer is much longer and has to do with the question of what does Moses exactly represent throughout the generations. In any case, what I want to get to here is that what was the aftermath? The aftermath for the people was that they felt that God hated them. I want to read, we're talking about Deuteronomy 1:27. V'tiragnu bo alechem. You sat and complained in your tents, and you said, "Besinat Hashem otanu," because God hates us, or because of God's hatred for us, He took us out of the land of Egypt to bring us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. It was a very harsh accusation, like that they said that because God hates us, but what is revealed here is a very well-known human tendency that when I feel that I've done something wrong, instead of doing tshuva, instead of repenting, instead of returning to God, I say God doesn't want to talk to me anyway. He doesn't want to see me anyway. He hates me. It's not that he hates me because he hates me. That's obviously not the case. He hates me because of what I did. And because he hates me because of what I did, there's no point in trying to make amends. There's no point in trying to fix anything. This is something that we do to people also. When we have a fight with someone, so we come and we say, well, he doesn't want to hear from me anyway, so I'm not going to pick up the phone. I'm not going to be the first one to reach out. And it's very, very common. And of course, it's with another person, in some cases it could be true. But with God, as we stressed a number of times already, there is no such thing. That God is always facing the person. And this is one of the examples of this very important principle, that God does not turn away from someone. There's no such statement anywhere. God is always facing the person, waiting for him to return. And if a person feels that he's unwanted, that feeling is entirely subjective. That feeling entirely comes from themselves. And it's a defense mechanism, basically trying to push the responsibility somewhere else and not to take responsibility for my actions. So that's the first thing I want to point out. The second one is in verse 31, ובמדבר אשר ראית, אשר נשאך השם אלוקיך כאשר יישא איש את בנו. And in this terrible wilderness that you've seen, when God has carried you as a man will carry his son. B'chol haderech asher halachtem ad boachem ad hamakom hazeh, in all the way that you went through until you came to this place. He's talking to them, of course, on the eve of their entrance into the land of Israel. What does this mean that God carried you as a man carries his son? So this again, why is this also rebuke? So it's rebuke because there's a number of ways that this is explained. It's been explained through the generations. I want to take it step by step. The usual explanation was that God carries you, meaning He supports you. Like a man would carry his son, like he has a little child, and he has to pick him up when the going gets difficult. That's the first level of it. But the more problematic level is, and Rashi notes it here, in Exodus 14 he brought this explanation, and he said there that it's not just that God carried them, it's God carries you and you ask, where is God? And Rashi explains it like this. He says, it's like a person who's taking a son with him. He's a young child, so he can't fend for himself. So in the beginning there's danger from the right side, so he moves the son to the left side, and he's still holding his hand, right? He's walking next to him. The son is walking next to the father. And then there's danger from the left side, so he picks him up and he puts him on his shoulders. So that now he's carrying him. And he walks with him. And then, as time passes, the son says, where's my father? It's like he forgets entirely that he's riding on top of him. That image became a very powerful image to describe how we are in life. That we don't notice that God is moving us from side to side until eventually, when there's no other option, He carries us Himself. And it's exactly then that we get the sort of the illusion that God's not present. Why? Because I'm riding high. I'm somehow, everything's working out. All these dangers from left and right are falling off to the sides and they're not touching me. And I feel, I'm having a good day, I'm having a good year, I'm having a good decade, whatever I'm having. And instead of attributing it to the fact that God is carrying me, so I begin to ask, where is God in my life? What has He done for me lately? It seems that I'm getting along just fine without Him. So that was part of the rebuke here, that many times it seemed to you as if you didn't need God at all. But in fact, you were being carried on His shoulders. And you especially feel that, again, the initial image is that He's saving you from different problems, from left and right. And the things are going well, you're high and dry. But over the years, it's very interesting that this image became something a little bit different. And I don't know if you've ever seen this. In Israel, it's very popular. And it goes something like this, that a man is walking through life, and he looks back, and he sees that in difficult places, there were two sets of footprints. And he wonders, who was this? Who was this other set of footprints that was walking with me? And he comes to the conclusion that it was God. The God was walking next to him. Again, it's an image. But then he notices that in the worst parts of life, the most difficult, there's only one set of footprints. And what does he feel? He feels that God abandoned him. And then the punchline at the end is that after he feels that God abandoned him in the worst parts and he was all alone, so God reveals Himself to him and says, the reason there was only one set of footprints was because I was carrying you on my shoulders. And so, not because I had abandoned you. This is a certain evolution of this image, which is actually talking about that things were very difficult, and you felt that they were very difficult. You didn't feel that you were in a high place. You didn't feel that things were going well. You felt actually that they were the worst that they were through your life, and the feeling was that God had abandoned you. Both of these things are considered a rebuke. The reason is that the Baal Shem Tov explains is that it takes a lot of submission, Baal Shem Tov calls it submission, to recognize that I'm never alone. It's the hardest thing to permeate, to break through. And it has to do with this idea that somehow I don't need God. It could be either very good and I don't feel that I need Him, or things are so bad I don't feel that He's present. To break through that feeling of being solitary in the world requires a lot of work. It's not a simple thing. It's not just I can tell someone, okay, you should recognize that really there's no such thing as man walking alone. There's no such thing in the world. The truth is that God is always with you. That's an easy statement to say. It's a much harder statement to come to recognize internally and to come to appreciate internally. And the Baal Shem Tov calls this part of the process of rectification the submission. Because again, there's this feeling that somehow either He wasn't here because I didn't need Him, or He wasn't here because I needed Him. Either way. Why is it submission? Because really it forces us to change our conception of what God is. The conception that most people have of God is like some kind of helper, some kind of some force that's acting from the outside. Sort of like the image of the man walking with his son next to him. But the image in Judaism, especially in Chassidut, in the Chassidic movement, is that God is certainly that, but even more than that, He is the very bedrock of your existence. Meaning there is no such thing as existing in the world, as passing through the world, and not being intimately one with the Creator. It simply doesn't exist. But this requires a lot of submission, because our ego gets in the way and makes us feel that God is something separate. God is something separate from ourselves. And I'll finish this with an illustration from one of Rabbi Ginsburg's teachers, who I was fortunate enough to meet once in my life. His name was Rabbi Asher Freund. And he once had this conversation with the head of yeshiva, who came to visit him, and they talked about the yeshiva, and Reb Usher asked him all kinds of questions. And to all the questions he said, God helps, God helps, God helps. And Reb Usher didn't like these answers. What do you mean God helps? So eventually at the end, this head of the yeshiva asks Reb Usher, so what about you? How are things going by you? So he wanted to rebuke him. So he said, by me, God doesn't help me at all. And so he was shocked. He said, really? You don't feel that God helps you at all? He says, no, He doesn't help me at all. He does everything. That ability to see that, to recognize that really we are what is called in the Talmud Mesayeh she'en bo mamash, a helper who is of no consequence. The way I usually describe this is we're like the cursor on the screen, and when you're typing in Word or wherever you're typing, and we're the cursor, we're the point where things happen, but it's of no consequence. The cursor cannot think that it's the one writing the story. It can't be the one that is bringing the words onto the screen. That's happening from somewhere else. We are just a point in reality where this is happening. Now this is what's called submission. It's not the end of the story. There's a lot more to develop after that. But by the Baal Shem Tov, this was the basis of coming to a recognition of God's presence in one's life. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope to see you tomorrow. I hope